Welcome to the painting tutorial for Gothmog, Sauron's trusted lieutenant and the commander of the armies of Mordor. Gothmog comes in two forms, mounted as well as dismounted.
The time of the orc has come.
It's definitely time to paint this orc, so let's get started. My first step is priming both models in black with my airbrush. Next, I mix equal parts gunmetal metallic with flow improver. I start with Gothmog on foot, and since he is very heavily armored, I coat the entire model with a zenithal prime of this silver. On the mounted model, I focus mainly on Gothmog, but if there was a little bit of silver that went onto the warg, it's not a big deal. I'll be zenithal highlighting that white in a little bit. I next bring out the white primer and I zenithal highlight the warg. I do my best to stay away from the silver highlighted areas, but if I do get some on the silver, I can always work it over with a brush later on. Since I'm going to be using speed paints on this model, I make sure that I apply a little bit of this white highlight to the bottom of the warg as well. The warg is a dingy beige color, so I use palette bone and I spray it directly from an airbrush all over the model. If there are areas that require more color, I just spray a little bit longer with the airbrush. The warg's mane is a darker brown, so I use hardened leather, and again from an airbrush, I spray it onto the top area of the warg. I also apply this color onto the tail and a little bit onto the snout. I switch to regular acrylics and use necrotic flesh, and I apply this onto Gothmog's skin. The areas that I cover are his head, his left shoulder, his left hand, and his right hand. For the mounted version, I just repeat the same process. For Gothmog's uniform, I use dragon red. I put some of this red inside the mouth of the warg as well. I switch back to Army Painter Speed Paints, hardened leather, and this I apply onto Gothmog's mace handle, and I also apply it onto all the various straps on the warg and the strap around his shoulder. The pelt on his back also gets this hardened leather speed paint. For areas that I miss with my airbrush, I go ahead and apply some gunmetal metallic paint. For instance, over here on the shield and also the mace head. I use skeleton bone acrylic paint for the teeth as well as the claws of the warg. I use just a little bit of leather brown acrylic paint to apply onto the straps around the shin guard. I use several different washes on this model, starting with flesh wash, which I apply on his skin areas. The darker washes tend to glaze a little bit too heavily, so I use this lighter wash, which gives it a little bit more of a natural look. Next, I switch to dark tone wash and I apply this on all his armor plates. This makes it really dark, almost black, and that's the look I was going for. I also used this dark wash on the head of his mace and on his shield. The last wash I use is strong tone, and this goes on his red uniform, and also the teeth and the claws of the warg. Now, since this is a main character, I gave it a little bit more attention by applying highlights. I start with ash gray, which is a nice bright gray, and I apply it more of a zenithal-like effect, which means that I only apply this highlight onto the upper areas of the armor, anything that's getting light from a top light source. This method is not only more realistic, but it also saves you time, because you do not have to highlight every single raised surface. Now switching to Gothmog's skin areas, I do the same thing, but this time with mummy robes. This is a more muted form of white, and it works well for highlighting his skin. Using the same technique as before, I only apply this highlight onto surfaces that are the closest to a top light source, and not every raised surface. I use this color on the teeth of the warg as well. I now apply a second layer of highlighting onto the armor just to make it really shine. I use matte white and I apply it within the ash gray lines that I had laid down earlier, and again only on surfaces that are the closest to the zenith light source. I mix a little bit of white into leather brown and I apply it as highlights onto the mace handle and other brown surfaces that are close to the zenith light source. The uniform are starting to look a little bit dark after washes, so I apply a little bit more dragon red onto the top surfaces. This gave it a little bit more vibrancy. For his eyes, well, I just kept it simple. I used some matte white, watered down a little bit, applied with a small brush into his eye sockets. I follow this up like I usually do with some matte black and the sharp tip of a toothpick. I apply his pupils with this method. The warg has tiny beady eyes, which are all black, so what I do is just apply some black directly with a small brush. Now it's time to base. The model itself is so awesome that you really shouldn't overdo basing. Just apply some Elmer's glue with an old brush and dunk it into the material base of your choice. I use the same dark soil basing material that I use with my orcs and my troll. The mounted version of Gothmog has a pretty large base, so I embellish it just a little bit more by applying some random spots of Elmer's glue and then placing this long grass-like basing material onto the base. This makes it appear like tufts of grass. I finish everything off by brushing some black primer around the rims of the bases just to clean them up. Here are the completed models, Gothmog all done, on foot as well as on a warg. I hope you will follow along for the remainder of the series where I paint up the heroes as well as the buildings. Until I see you the next time, happy hobbying.